It's that time of year again when a lot of people are starting or have already started a diet, right? New Year's resolutions, all these people want to try something new. And interestingly, what I'm seeing pop up more and more is intermittent fasting. Now, this is something that's been around for a while, so I do find it interesting that it's kind of like re-coming up. But I wanted to talk about that today because I've done a lot of different videos over the years about intermittent fasting on social media. And I want to remind you that there's quite a few different research studies that have shown that there is no difference between doing intermittent fasting and just a regular calorie deficit diet. In one study, they actually followed 150 overweight and obese individuals, and they tracked exactly that. They did one group that just did a moderate calorie deficit, and they did another group that did intermittent fasting, and there was no difference in weight loss between the two groups. So that's very important to point out because I do think, especially again this time of year, a lot of people are sort of saying like, oh, it's the miracle solution, or like you just have to intermittent fast, that's what's best for you, when really there's no difference between just modifying some behaviors in your lifestyle, right? So don't feel like intermittent fasting is the gold standard just because a lot of people are talking about it. Now, that I've said all of that, what I want to tell you is a case study. I want to share with you an individual who was doing intermittent fasting and how that impacted her metabolic rate. So these are the results of this person's metabolic test at her initial visit. Now, she had been intermittent fasting before coming in to see us. She was doing the 16 and 8 version, and so her eating window was noon to 8. And in that time period, she was eating roughly 2,000 calories in that window, right? So you're thinking, okay, that doesn't sound that terrible, right? However, she was also very active. She was someone who had a job that was very active. She was on her feet most of the day. And she was doing exercise. She was exercising 5 days a week for about 45 minutes to an hour. It was like a mix of cardio and weights. Just to point out, she was exercising during that fasting window. So she would exercise in the morning. Remember, she wasn't eating until noon. And then she would eat about 2,000 calories from noon to 8. Now, yes, there was a little bit of variability. There was some days that her calories were only 1,700. But for the most part, it was in that range of right around 2,000 when we looked at all of her days. So 2,000 calories, eating between noon and 8, exercising in the morning during her fasting window, and a very active job. And let's take a look at her results, right? So you see here that her resting metabolic rate is at 741. That's like half of what it should be at 1370. So her body is really adapting here from what I would consider, in one way or another, under-eating and over-exercising based on this pattern of intake that she had been following. So her resting metabolic rate is really low. What's also important to note here is this protein metabolism. So this is the body's breakdown of lean mass and muscle, right? Her body's breaking down 23% more of her lean mass and muscle than it should be. That green bar there is sort of the range of what your body should be breaking down with lean mass and muscle. It should be somewhere in that range. So your body's always breaking down just a little bit of it. It's how your body creates a negative nitrogen balance. I digress. So this is 23% above that. And what's interesting about that is, again, I've shared this in other videos, there's also research studies to show that with intermittent fasting, people did lose weight, but they actually lost a significant amount of lean mass. So it's interesting that this case study sort of showed the same thing. So really low metabolic rate and really high protein substrate. So what did we do? We, of course, had her stop intermittent fasting. Now, let me say, I did present her the option, right? I told her that she could intermittent fast, but we'd really have to ramp up calories. She'd probably have to eat more like 2,600 to 2,700, if not even a little bit more, because again, how active her job was in her eating window. So she could either try to cram in 26 to maybe 2,800 calories in this noon to 8 window, or she could stop intermittent fasting, still wanting her to eat about 2,600 calories, but you could spread it out a little bit more, right? And so she agreed. She decided that she was going to stop intermittent fasting and focus on eating about 2,600 calories a day. What's interesting though is she never really made it to the 2600. When we were looking back at her food logs, she was someone who was eating 2000 to 2300, but just not intermittent fasting anymore. So a slight increase, right? Because before it was at 2000, a little bit below. So now it was about 2000 to 2300, but she never actually made it to the 2600 amount. Her exercise stayed the same, her job stayed the same. Let's take a look at her next metabolic test that we did about 6 months later. So 6 months later, no intermittent fasting, eating roughly 2,000 to 2,300 calories, exercise and job were the same. Look at her metabolic rate now. It's normal. It's at 1350, which is right near where we predict it to be. So that's awesome. Her metabolism basically doubled. And then most importantly, this protein metabolism is now normal. So what this means here is her body is no longer breaking down too much of her lean mass or muscle mass, right? Her protein metabolism is right where we would expect it to be, meaning her body is actually fueled enough to use food and fat as her source of fuel instead of fat and a lot of muscle. So what's so important to note here is that intermittent fasting is not the gold standard. I know a lot of people talk about it, and I'm sure there's tons of people out there that have some sort of story about why it was great for them, but I don't want you to think that it's the only way to go, and just because it worked for someone else, it's gonna work for you. As with any other diet or fad thing that's out there, that's never the case. Each body is unique, and it's really important that you listen to your body's specific needs. Guys, thanks so much for being here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.